literature review? Do we have to finish the literature review?
No, you don't have to because literature review you need to read too many papers, and we cannot finish it during the semester, right? So we don't have to. Any other question? Oh.
So, Professor, is any differences about when we doing the introduction in the thesis and doing the introduction in articles?
Length. Only the length. So basically, in the introduction, if you are writing the introduction of your thesis, then you will have like 3 to 4 sections, and you will also talk about the section of the thesis, right? The structure of the thesis. But for research articles, because they have word limit, so usually they will be shorter and they won't talk about the structure of thesis depending on the journals.
Also, all the step is same.
Yeah, almost the same. Yeah, almost the same. Okay. Okay, so today we're going to talk about methodology. So basically, we finished introduction and literature review because in the last session I already talked about that we cannot finish literature review here because you cannot read 10 articles, 20 articles here in the semester, right? But we already talked about how you structure your literature review by outlining your chapter 2. Okay, so after you submit your introduction revision, I will look at your revisions, and also if you listed the outlines, I will look at the outlines as well. And we also talk about how to organize the outline based on the important elements in the title and in your study. Okay? So from this week, from now on, we will move on to methodology and then results, discussion, etc. Basically, we will cover every section, although you just write your proposal, but you still need to know how to write results and discussion after you finish your proposal, after you finish your data collection. Okay. So, we already talked about introduction. Today we will talk about methodology. And methodology is a bridge between introduction and results. So the methodology needs to correspond to your research question. One of the problems is that usually students will collect a lot of data, but the data do not correspond to their research question. Your data cannot help you answer the research question. Or maybe you have 2 research questions, but you have 5 data. And some data can answer, some data cannot. Or you have 5 research questions, but only 2 data collection. And then these 2 data can only answer 2 research questions, cannot answer the other 3. So that's the main problem that we usually find in students' thesis. So your methodology needs to make sure that all of your data would help you answer all of the research questions, okay? And then your results need to report every data that you collect, okay? So sometimes, again, like I said, sometimes you will have 3 data collection, but your results only report 2, okay? So this is not okay as well. So the methodology needs to be the bridge between introduction and results. And the functions or the purpose of methods is that you need to bind your research method with previous procedures. That is, you need to justify. You need to let your readers know why this kind of data collection is justified, is correct, is robust, is valid, is reliable. Okay? And also, just like I said, binds it with other sections such as introduction and results. And also convince the readers about your research methodology. So again, you need to consider the validity and reliability, or in qualitative research, you need to consider transferability and credibility in your methodology. You need to establish your credits in methods. So also you need to consider who is your audience. If you are writing your proposal and your audience is your professor, then you need to think about how do you write your method section, and then your professors will believe that you can go outside and do this method by yourself. So you need to provide very clear evidence that yes, I can do it. Okay. Okay, so there are also some linguistic features of methodologies, especially in our fields, because we have disciplinary variances, right? So the linguistic features in our fields may be different from linguistic features in other fields, okay? So in our fields, basically based on your intuition, in methodology we have more present tense or more past tense.
Past tense.
Yeah, more past tense, right? We have more passive voice or more active voice. Yeah, more passive. Yes, very good. Do we have a lot of citations in methodology?
No. No.
Talk about the method you adapt, you need to cite.
Yeah, but do we have a lot?
Not a lot.
Yeah, comparatively little, right? Okay. Do we have a lot of we should combine this kind of words? Possibly, probably, we should combine in methodology? No, because we're talking about procedure, right? Yeah. So basically, we have higher frequency. Oh, but it's relative, right? Okay. Remember, whenever I use this kind of tables, we are always talking about relatively and can see it as a continuum. Okay. Okay. So in the spectrum of the fields, in our fields, past tense is relatively higher. The frequency is relatively higher, because usually in our research, if you are doing qualitative research, also is more past tense. If you are doing qualitative research, such as some questionnaires or experiments, also more past tense. But for some research, probably they will have present tense. For example, if you are analyzing, for example, language features, text analysis, sometimes they will use more present tense in text analysis. Okay, so depending on, actually that will a little bit depending on your research method. Okay, so also voice as well. So if you are doing quantitative research, usually passive voice will be higher. Okay, and for qualitative research as well. But for qualitative research, sometimes if you are talking about I interviewed, okay, I observed, then at that time active voice will be much higher. Okay, so depending on different research methodology, research paradigm, okay, your tense will be a little bit, the frequency will be a little bit different as well. Okay, so in methodology, actually from methodology you will see more remarkable disciplinary differences. Okay, usually in introduction, every field will be very similar, but starting from methodology, you will see disciplinary differences and even subdisciplinary differences. Okay, so this is the section that you can find some variations even within our fields. So sometimes, usually in social sciences, especially in our fields, the methodology is usually described in detail, okay? However, if you are doing, for example, some computer-assisted language learning or some experiments, sometimes it will be shorter because the methodology will be a little bit similar to natural science. And for natural science, engineering, etc., because their methodology is usually similar, right? They have a fixed structure. For example, which solution need to put in which solution, and they need to centrifugate, and they need to do something. Okay, so sometimes their procedure is fixed. So if their procedure is fixed, then their methodology will be shorter because they will assume every reader will know. If I do this urine analysis, then there is a fixed set of procedure. There is a fixed set of steps. So they can sort of briefly explain. But in social sciences, you need to explain in more detail. Why? Because in our fields, we do not have a fixed procedure, right? You can freely use your data collection. You can combine pre-test, post-test, and interview. You can combine pre-test, post-test, and questionnaire. You can combine pre-test, post-test with, for example, observation. So we do not have a very fixed step of data collection. So that's why you need to explain more. Why you want to do this, why you want to do that. And sometimes you would design your own questionnaire, so you need to explain why you design this, okay? So that's why in social sciences we will have more detailed methodology. You will need to explain more, okay? So basically, for natural sciences, they will go for more condensed approach, but for social sciences, we will go for more extended approach to talk about more, okay? So for condensed approach, this is for natural sciences. They would be shorter, okay? They will use a lot of acronyms, okay? They would assume some background knowledge. So they will have very few definitions, examples, justifications, etc. But for extended approach, which is in social sciences, we need to provide some background. So if you are using someone's questionnaire, you need to say why you use this questionnaire. Or if you want to use a specific set of data collection, you need to talk about it. So that's why your professors or advisors sometimes will say you need to find out your own theoretical framework or your analytical framework. That is the analytical framework, that is the background. So for example, whose motivation questionnaire, right? We have a set of questionnaire for motivation. So which scholars motivation questionnaire you are using, okay? And or if you are using, for example, action research, then you need to talk about, okay, what is action research? Why you use action research? So that's why usually for qualitative research and for applied linguistics, usually we will have several named sections, subsections. Because we are extended, you need to explain in details for participants, for research sites, for data collection, for data analysis, okay? And you will use a lot of descriptions to talk about your participants, research sites, etc. And usually you will have more sentences, especially some how statements, how did you do it? And you will talk about some definitions, examples, for example, examples of your questionnaire items, examples of your interview questions, okay? And some justifications, okay? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And of course, then you will have a lot of linking phrases, including after you do this, da 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 da, as soon as da 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 da. Okay, some linking phrases is used in order to describe the procedure of your data collection and data analysis. Okay? We will see some examples later on. Okay, so basically there are some possible elements in methodology. So depending on your design, okay, you may have include some of the elements or all of the elements. Okay. So for example, if you are doing proposal, sometimes your advisor may suggest that you have an overview of the experiment, or we do not say overview of the experiment. You may say study design. Okay. So sometimes in 3.1, you may see study design section. So what is study design? Study design is to describe your overall design of the study, especially, for example, maybe you are using mixed method study, okay, then you need to talk about, okay, I'm using mixed method study. So what is my qualitative research data? What is my quantitative data, etc. Okay, so sometimes you will find that, and sometimes advisors would require you have this kind of section. And also in study design, it would be better if you can include a table, okay, or a figure. So what kind of table? So you will talk about, okay, my study design is, for example, mixed method. So mixed method include quantitative pretest. 水了。 Okay, so for quantitative research, pretest, post-test, right? Okay, and for qualitative data, I have, for example, interview. Okay, and for study design, you need to talk about, okay, you are mixed method, etc., etc. Why you use mixed method, right? And then we would suggest students to include a table, for example, your research question, Q1, Q2, Q3, right? And then you need to mention a chorus link. For example, your Q1 will be answered by, for example, pretest, interview, something like that. A table to talk about which method will answer which question in your study design section, if you have this section, okay? So some advisors will require you to do this, some advisors will not, depending on your advisors. But if they ask you to write a section about study design, then you will know it's usually about this, to talk about your overall design of your study. Sometimes they will ask you to write down the procedure. Sometimes they will ask you to write down this kind of table to persuade your committee members that you know which question should be answered by which data. Okay? So also, in addition to that, of course, we have participants, research site, okay, some conditions, how do you do sampling, your procedures, materials. If you are using quantitative research, then you will have some variables, your statistical treatment, what kind of statistical procedures that you're using, etc. So these are all possible elements that you can include in your methodology depending on, like I said, because we have a lot of variations. So depending on your own study design, you can include some of the elements. Okay, so these are all possible moves in methodology. Like I said, because we have variations, so probably you will not have every step. Okay, but for scholars, they would include every possible step for you to choose from. Okay, so this is not compulsory, but you may find some of the steps useful. Okay. Okay, so first is to describing the model. Okay, so what is the model? So if you are doing quantitative research, then that will be model. If you are doing qualitative research, that will be participants. Okay, so first of all, you will describe the data. So in here, data means participants. Okay, so basically move 1 is to talk about your participants. Okay, so you describing the data is to talk about your participants. Okay, and then step 2 is to talk about how you recruit your participants, right? Okay, and then step 3 is to justify how you recruit your participants. So basically, move 1 is all about participants. Okay, and move 2 is about your data collection. So step 1, to talk about overall design, sometimes you will have this, sometimes you don't have. So the design is not about the study design here. The design is about, for example, maybe you have a new course, then you will talk about your new course. Maybe you will design some questionnaire, then that will be questionnaire. Maybe you will have some new material, then that will be new material. Maybe you design some test questions, then step 1 will be some tests. Okay, so this is about the materials that you design. So sometimes you have, sometimes you don't. And step 2 is to talk about how you collect your data. Okay, so for example, how you conduct your survey, how you conduct your pre-test process, how you conduct your interview. And step 3 is to justify. Okay, justify why you do this. Justify why you do step ABC, not step CAB. Okay, so move 2 is about data collection. Then move 3 is about data analysis. So step 1 is all about your data analysis, how you analyze your data, etc. And step 2 is to justify. Okay, so sometimes you may find step 2 go first, step 1 go later, because sometimes the researchers will say, okay, because some scholars' analytical framework is very useful, so I will use this. So this is a justify, right? So maybe you will see step 2 first, and then step 1, you talk about your analytical procedure. Okay, but sometimes step 1 first, sometimes step 2 first. Okay. So we will talk about these moves and steps one by one. So basically, like we said, we have a lot of past tense, passive voice, and also in methodology, we will have some procedural verbs. So for example, something is performed, some questionnaire is conducted, or something is measured, used. Okay, so especially the methodology will be, specific methods will be used. So for example, microbiological analysis will be performed, or you may say thematic analysis was performed, okay? And you will also justify this analysis. So for example, many students have a lot of problems with analyzing interviews. So when they write, I'm going to interview people, okay? In chapter 3.2, data collection, and in chapter 3.3, when they say, okay, data analysis, then committee member will ask, okay, so what kind of analytical method will you use in analyzing your interview? And they will, I don't know, okay. So you need to talk about, okay, which analysis you are using to analyze your interview. Will it be content analysis, thematic analysis? We already talked about that in qualitative research. So If you are using qualitative research in your thesis, you need to go back to check our notes. So you need to talk about it. And then you may justify, okay, why do you want to use content analysis? Why do you want to use thematic analysis? Because okay. So you need to have a very strong justification, especially in proposal. If you are writing your proposal, justification is very important. So that's why when we talk about these moves, as you can see, every step, every last step, step 3, justify, step 3, justify, step 2, justify. Almost every move you have justification because you need to justify your action. Why do you recruit this kind of people, not that kind of people? Okay, why do you do this data collection but not instead of the other one? Why do you analyze your data like this but not using another method? Okay, so in your proposal, you need to persuade your committee members why you do this, why you do that. Okay, so we will starting from move 1. Okay, so move 1 is to describe your data. Here we will mean participants. Okay, and how do you recruit your participants and justify your participants? So describe the data is to talk about if you have materials, then that will be materials. If you have participants, that will be participants. So I would assume that all of you, because I see your paper, usually you are talking about with participants, right? So that will be participants. For some, for example, my previous students, they don't have participants. They analyze textbooks. So here, then that would be textbooks. And for my another student, she analyzed newspapers, right? So here, then that would be newspapers. So that's why we will not just use participants because that is too narrow. So by saying data, we're referring to participants if your participants is a human being, or textbooks, or newspapers, or research articles if your data is non-human being, right? Okay. Okay, so here are some examples. For example, participants, describe your participants, the characteristics of your participants. So that would be participants were 110 second-year non-English majors from where, right? So this will be describing the characteristics of your participants. Okay, they are their age, their major, okay, and how many. Okay, so these are describing the data. Or the study population includes all children and young adults up to age 26. So this will be a large questionnaire study. So they include everyone, but also they will say some limits. What do we mean by young adults? Up to 26. That is what we mean, young adults, right? Okay. So you would describe your participants, the characteristics of your participants. For example, 40 freshman students, or 3 intact classes from an elementary school in northern Taiwan, something like that. Okay, and then this is step 2. Step 2 is to talk about how you recruit your participants. Okay, so for example, the sample was obtained by asking school teachers to refer, right? Okay, so this is like what? Snowball sampling, right? You can say the samples were recruited by snowball sampling strategy. First, I asked school teachers to refer and And also, individual participants were chosen. Why? Based on the nature of Okay. So they talk about the procedure, how they recruit your participants. So your participants were not recruited out of no reason. but for some reasons and for some steps, right? So you need to talk about the steps of your recruitment. Okay, how did you recruit? Okay. Okay, so these are some examples from your paper. For example, various purposeful sampling techniques were used to recruit participants with the goal of da 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 da. Okay, so they use purposeful sampling techniques, and they talk about what kind of purposeful sampling techniques later on to talk about the procedures of the sampling, right? Or 84 families were selected, okay, in the reading program were also randomly selected to participate in this study. So that is, they are randomly selected, right? So they are also talk about how they recruit participants. So whether you are using purposeful sampling or you are using random sampling, snowball sampling, okay, we already talk about that in qualitative research. We will not talk about that again, but you know what kind of sampling strategies, what kind of recruitment strategies that you are using, and then you can talk about that in your paper. Okay? So this is how you recruit your participants. And then you may justify why you want to recruit this way. Okay? Why do you want to randomly assign? Why do you want to use snowball sampling? Why do you want to use purposeful sampling? Why? Okay? So for example, in order to ensure that participants from the same proficiency level, so I would recruit participants, but I need to make sure they are in the same proficiency, right? So a test, placement test, was administered to measure their proficiency level before starting the study. So that is, I justify how I recruit my participants. First, I recruit them, but because I want to do some pre-test, post-test, so I need to make sure their level is similar, right? Then how do I ensure? I do a test first to ensure their level is similar first. So this is a justification. To justify that my recruitment of participants is valid, okay, is no problem, okay. Okay, so this is some examples from your paper. Only degree-seeking international graduate students were selected for 2 reasons. So first of all, they talk about